I was on my way to the meeting about my husband's inheritance. Just as I slid behind the wheel and adjusted the seatbelt, a ragged man came rushing toward me, waving his arms frantically. His voice cracked as he shouted, "Ma'am, don't start that car. Your daughter-in-law." The words froze my blood before I could even process what he meant. That Tuesday morning was supposed to be ordinary, but it became the day that shifted the ground beneath my feet. I had turned 64, an age where I believed I had already survived life's harshest storms. My husband Richard's death 3 months earlier had nearly broken me, yet I had been pulling myself together piece by piece, surviving the long empty nights and the endless silence of our home. When the attorney's office called earlier that day at exactly 9, the secretary's voice had been brisk, almost indifferent. "Mrs. Carter, the estate settlement is scheduled for 2 o'clock. Will you be able to attend?" Without hesitation, I had said yes. It felt like the final chapter one needed to close before learning how to live again. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I took care dressing that morning. My hand reached for the navy blue dress Richard had given me for our 35th anniversary. A dress he once said made my eyes look brighter. Around my neck I clasped the single strand of pearls he had gifted me on our wedding day. For a moment, staring into the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. The grief of recent months had drawn new lines across my skin, dulled the auburn tones of my hair, and left a fragile exhaustion in my expression. I forced myself to straighten my shoulders. Richard would have wanted me strong. The drive into the city should have been routine, yet every mile seemed heavier than the last. Traffic crawled. My fingers tapped restlessly on the steering wheel, and a vague anxiety pressed against my chest. There should have been no reason for nerves. Richard and I had spoken often about his will. Everything was clear, everything was simple. His estate was to be mine until the day I passed, with provision secured for our son Daniel and his family afterward. There was nothing to worry about. Or so I thought. Pulling into the underground parking garage of the law building, the space seemed colder than usual, the concrete echoing every sound. I switched off the ignition, gathered the folder of papers I had been asked to bring, and stepped out. That was when I heard the voice. Urgent, desperate. "Ma'am, wait." I turned, startled. From behind a concrete pillar emerged a man who looked as though life had stripped him of everything but the clothes on his back. He seemed to be in his 50s, his jacket frayed, jeans faded, boots worn thin. His hair was unkempt, his face lined with weather and hardship. My first instinct was to hurry toward the elevator, but something in his eyes rooted me to the spot. They weren't wild or threatening. They carried a pleading sincerity that stopped me cold. "Please," he said, keeping a careful distance. "I know this looks strange, but you're Mrs. Carter, right? Richard's widow." My heart thudded so hard I could hear it in my ears. How did this stranger know my name? How did he know Richard? I tightened my grip on my purse, already reaching for my phone. "I don't know who you are, but you need to leave me alone," I managed, my voice unsteady. "Please," he begged again. "My name's Frank Doyle. I used to work upstairs for Morrison and Associates. I was let go a few weeks ago. Before they pushed me out, I overheard things about your husband's will. I had to warn you." His words made my stomach twist. Morrison and Associates was the very firm I was about to meet. Frank glanced nervously around the garage as though someone might be listening. "Your daughter-in-law Vanessa has been working with people at that office. She's been telling them you're not capable of handling Richard's estate. She's gathered medical notes, statements, even signatures. She's making it look like you're confused, forgetful, unstable." For a moment I could only stare at him, the folder in my hand slipping slightly as though my strength had drained away. "That's impossible," I whispered. "I've never been treated for anything like that. I handle my affairs perfectly well." "I know," he said quickly, his tone almost urgent. "That's why I waited here, hoping to see you before you walked into their trap. Vanessa told Morrison you'd probably forget the appointment altogether. She didn't expect you to show up." The words burned hotter than fire in my chest. My daughter-in-law. Sweet smiles, kind hugs, polite words for 8 years. Could she really be weaving lies to strip me of everything Richard left? Frank's voice softened. "There's more. She's had documents altered. She's paying them to make it look like your husband changed his will at the end. They're setting you up to sign away control without even realizing it. I pressed a trembling hand against the car, trying to steady myself. It felt as though the world tilted sideways. Richard had never doubted me with money. If anything, I had always been the one carefully managing our savings. Why would you risk telling me this? I asked, searching his face for any hint of deceit. Because your husband was a good man, Frank replied, sincerity flooding his tired eyes. He treated me with kindness when no one else did. I may not have much, but I won't stand by while they erase his wishes. The elevator bell chimed faintly in the distance. Frank stepped back, blending again into the shadows. Be careful. Don't let them pressure you. Read everything before you sign. Please. And then he was gone. I stood frozen, torn between disbelief and the gnawing certainty that he spoke the truth. Vanessa, the daughter-in-law who had always smiled too quickly, whispered too much with Daniel, diverted conversations when I joined the room. The little glances of irritation I had brushed off over the years now felt like pieces of a puzzle I had never dared to assemble. With shaking fingers, I pressed the elevator button. As the doors slid closed, I caught a glimpse of Frank watching me from behind a pillar, his face etched with concern. My pulse hammered as the lift climbed floor after floor. By the time the doors opened to the polished reception area above, my breath was shallow, my resolve thin. The office was hushed, too hushed, the kind of silence that feels rehearsed. Mahogany furniture gleamed under the lights, and expensive art lined the walls. What once would have impressed me now seemed like a trap disguised in luxury. Mrs. Cotta, the receptionist greeted smoothly. They're waiting for you in conference room A. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I walked down the long hallway. Through the frosted glass of the door, I saw the outlines of several figures seated around a table. One silhouette I recognized instantly. Vanessa's delicate frame, her distinct hair. I inhaled deeply, tightened my grip on my purse, and pushed the door open. The room I stepped into was colder than I had imagined, even though sunlight streamed through the tall windows. 3 men in expensive suits sat rigidly on one side of the table. On the opposite side, like she belonged there, sat Vanessa. She looked up the moment I entered. For a brief second, I caught something flicker across her face. Shock, maybe fear, but it vanished so quickly I almost doubted myself. A heartbeat later, she smiled. The same polished, honey-sweet smile she had been giving me for years. "Oh, Evelyn," she said smoothly, tilting her head with feigned surprise. "I didn't think you'd make it today." Her tone wasn't innocent. It was condescending, almost rehearsed. Frank's words echoed in my mind, fueling the anger that burned hotter than my fear. I set my purse on the table, making sure the sound of it dropping onto the wood echoed in the room. "Of course I'm here," I said evenly, though my hands trembled slightly. "This is about my husband's estate. Richard's legacy. I wouldn't miss it." The lead attorney, a narrow man with slick silver hair and eyes that felt as lifeless as glass, gestured toward the empty chair across from Vanessa. "Please, Mrs. Carter, have a seat. We'll go through a few documents that require your signature." I lowered myself into the chair, my spine stiff as a board. Vanessa avoided meeting my eyes directly. Instead, she twisted her wedding ring around her finger again and again, like a nervous habit she couldn't control. I folded my hands on the table and leaned forward slightly. "Before I sign anything," I said, my voice stronger than I expected, "I'd like to hear exactly what this meeting is about. Richard and I discussed his will many times. I know his wishes well." The 3 attorneys exchanged quick, loaded glances. The silver-haired one cleared his throat. "Mrs. Carter, there have been developments. In his final weeks, your husband expressed concerns about—" Stop. The word escaped my lips before I could even think. It hung in the air like a sharp blade. Vanessa finally looked at me then, her eyes wide, almost shimmering with what she wanted to pass off as concern. "Evelyn," she said softly, as if speaking to a fragile child. "Richard was worried about your health. He mentioned incidents. Times when you seemed confused, forgetful. He just wanted to make sure everything would be handled properly." Her words stung more than any insult ever could. "Incidents?" My voice cracked with disbelief. "What incidents?" One of the attorneys slid a folder across the polished table toward me. My fingers shook as I pulled it closer and opened it. Inside were neatly arranged documents. Typed statements, medical reports, even photographs. My eyes caught on one page, and my stomach dropped. The handwriting was familiar. Vanessa's handwriting. I read aloud, my voice breaking as I struggled with each word. Evelyn became extremely agitated when asked about grocery shopping. She couldn't remember what she had bought or how much she had spent. When Daniel tried to help organize her receipts, she accused him of trying to steal from her. My hand trembled so violently I almost dropped the page. This is a lie. I never accused my son of stealing anything. Vanessa's voice lowered, her tone almost pitying, like she was rehearsing her role. You did say those things, Evelyn. We were all worried about you. That's why Richard decided. I snapped my gaze toward her, my chest rising and falling with fury. This woman, this girl I had welcomed into my family, hugged at Christmas dinners, trusted during Richard's illness, was painting me as senile, unfit. The lead attorney spoke again, his tone deliberately calm. Your husband amended his will to place the estate in a trust. The trustee would be your son, Daniel. You would, of course, be cared for. There are provisions for your expenses. The words blurred as if the room itself was spinning. My hands gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. My voice broke into a whisper. You're telling me Richard didn't trust me to handle my own life? My own money? It wasn't about trust, Vanessa interjected quickly, her sweet mask slipping just enough to reveal a spark of irritation beneath. It was about protection. Richard loved you, Evelyn. He only wanted to make sure you'd be okay. I stared at her, and for the first time I saw not my daughter-in-law, but a stranger wearing her face. Every smile, every gentle word, every mom she had called me, it all curdled in my memory. Then something caught my eye. In the corner of the room, sitting unnoticed on a small shelf, was a recording device. Its red light blinked steadily. My stomach clenched. Are you recording this meeting? The attorneys stiffened. One finally muttered, it's standard practice for estate settlements. Standard practice to record a grieving widow without her consent? My voice cut like ice. Before anyone could answer, there was a sharp knock at the door. A young secretary poked her head in. Mr. Morrison, there's someone here insisting to see you. He says it's urgent. The silver-haired attorney frowned deeply. We're in the middle of a meeting. He says his name is Frank Doyle. The air in the room shifted instantly. All color drained from Vanessa's face. She looked like the ground had just been ripped out from under her. I don't know anyone by that name, Morrison snapped quickly. Tell him we're not available. Actually, I said, pushing back my chair and rising to my feet, I'd very much like to hear what Mr. Doyle has to say. Vanessa's voice pitched higher, strained, desperate. Evelyn, that's not necessary. We should just finish these documents. But it was too late. The door opened wider, and Frank appeared. He was cleaner than he had been in the garage, though still out of place in the sea of tailored suits. His worn messenger bag hung from his shoulder, his eyes meeting mine with a steady determination. I'm sorry to interrupt, he said respectfully, but Mrs. Carter needs to see this. The room fell into silence the moment Frank spoke. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, each second stretching like an hour. Vanessa's hand slipped from her wedding ring, and she pressed both palms flat against the table as if to steady herself. Her face had lost all its color, her lips parted slightly like she was about to faint. Morrison, the lead attorney, stood so abruptly that his chair screeched against the polished floor. His face turned red, his composure cracking. Sir, you're trespassing. Leave at once, or I'll call security. Frank didn't flinch. His voice remained calm, though I saw the tension in the lines of his jaw. Go ahead, call them. But before you do, Mrs. Carter should see what I've brought. He pulled a manila folder from his bag and set it carefully on the table, sliding it toward me like it was made of glass. My breath caught in my throat. My trembling fingers hovered above the folder, afraid of what it might reveal, yet desperate for the truth. Vanessa's voice broke through, sharp and frantic. Evelyn, don't listen to him. He's lying. He's bitter because he was fired. He's unstable. Frank's gaze never left mine. They told you Richard changed his will, didn't they? My knees nearly buckled. I gripped the back of my chair, clinging to it for support. Yes, I whispered. Frank opened the folder and carefully spread out several papers across the table. His hand moved slowly, deliberately, like every document was proof of something sacred. These are the originals. I made copies before they dismissed me. Your husband's real will, signed 6 months before his passing. And his actual medical records, untouched, unaltered. The words swirled in my mind, colliding with everything I had been told just minutes before. I bent down to study the papers. The handwriting, the signature, I knew it. Richard's signature. The bold curve of his R. The careful tilt of his letters. I had watched that hand sign birthday cards, tax forms, love notes for over 40 years. Tears stung my eyes. My chest rose and fell as though I had been underwater and finally reached the surface. This is real, I whispered, tracing his name with my fingertip. Vanessa shot up from her chair, her voice trembling. That can't be right. He must have forged it. He's lying. Am I? Frank asked quietly, pulling another paper from his bag. Because I also have copies of the payments your daughter-in-law made to this firm. Thousands of dollars. Payments marked as consulting fees. Tell me, Mrs. Carter, what kind of consulting costs $50,000 in cash? The room shifted. I could feel the energy change, heavy, suffocating. One of the other attorneys coughed nervously, his eyes darting toward Morrison as if silently blaming him. Vanessa's hands shook violently. She sank back into her chair like the strength had drained from her body. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to rescue her. But no one spoke. My voice quivered, but it came out strong. Why? I asked, my gaze fixed on Vanessa. Why would you do this to me? Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked at me with wide, frantic eyes, like a child caught in the act of a terrible lie. Frank answered for her, his tone filled with quiet disgust. Because she and your son are drowning in debt. They've mortgaged their home, maxed out credit cards, and run his business into the ground. And instead of asking for help, she thought it would be easier to steal from you. The words slammed into me harder than any physical blow could. My heart squeezed painfully. My son. My only son. The boy Richard and I had raised with love, the man we thought we had taught better. Had he known? Vanessa finally spoke, her voice cracking like glass. We didn't mean to hurt you. We didn't have a choice. I shook my head slowly, my tears now spilling freely. No. Vanessa. There is always a choice. Morrison tried to recover his authority, his voice hard and clipped. This is outrageous. None of this proves anything. These documents could be fake. Fake. Frank's voice grew sharper now. I was the paralegal who filed these. I worked on Richard's estate personally. These are the originals. You can compare signatures, dates, seals, everything matches. And if that's not enough, I also have a log of emails between this firm and Vanessa. Every word of your arrangement is there. Vanessa made a soft, pitiful whimper and collapsed against the back of her chair. For a moment I thought she had fainted, but her eyes remained open, darting around like a trapped animal. I took a shaky step forward, pointing at her with trembling hands. You sat by Richard's hospital bed. You smiled at me at holidays. You called me Mom. And all that time you were planning this. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks as she finally whispered, Daniel and I, we had debts. We thought. You thought you could erase me, I interrupted, my voice trembling but strong. You thought you could turn Richard's love into your lifeline while making me look like a fool. Frank slid the will directly in front of me. Mrs. Carter, this is your husband's true will. Every word honors you. He never doubted you. Not once. I placed my palm on the paper, feeling Richard's presence in every line. The room around me blurred. For a moment, I was back in our living room, watching him lean over the table with his pen, pausing to adjust his glasses before signing. The memory made my chest ache, but it also gave me strength. I lifted my chin, my tears drying into resolve. You will not take this from me, I said firmly. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one moved. No one breathed. And then Frank looked at me with steady eyes and said, It's time to call the police. The moment Frank said those words, call the police, the air shifted. It was like every pair of eyes in that room froze in place, waiting for someone else to make the first move. My breath came in shallow bursts. I wasn't sure if I was shaking from fear, anger, or relief. Vanessa let out a weak cry, her voice breaking. No, please. Please, we can fix this. Evelyn, listen to me. She leaned across the table, her manicured nails gripping the edge so tightly that her knuckles turned white. For the first time, there was no sweet mask, no soft tone. Just raw desperation. I stared at her, my lips trembling. You spent months painting me as senile. You told people I couldn't remember names, that I accused my own son of stealing from me. Do you have any idea what that feels like? To be alive, to be grieving, and to hear people already writing you off as confused and broken. Her tears spilled, but I felt nothing for her. My heart was too full of Richard, of his faith in me, of the life we built, to feel pity for someone who had tried to erase all of it. Frank reached into his bag again, pulling out more papers. His calm steadiness felt like the only thing keeping me from collapsing. Mrs. Carter, these invoices show exactly what Morrison's firm charged Vanessa for. Document alterations, estate adjustments, even witness payments. I kept copies because I knew this was wrong. They thought firing me would silence me. But I couldn't walk away knowing what they were doing to you. The attorneys scrambled, flipping through their folders, whispering to each other in harsh tones. One of them muttered, "We shouldn't. This isn't safe." The other shushed him quickly, but I caught it. They were panicking. Morrison slammed his palm against the table, his voice loud and shaking. "This is nonsense. None of this will stand in court." Frank turned to him, his voice cool and unyielding. "Maybe not in your court. But in front of the police? In front of a judge? With real evidence? I think it will." Vanessa suddenly pushed back from the table and stumbled to her feet. Her face was pale as paper, streaked with mascara, her chest heaving. "We didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered, her voice barely audible. We just needed help." Her words cracked something deep inside me. My body felt heavy, my throat tight. "Help," I repeated slowly, the word bitter on my tongue. "Help is when you ask. Help is when you sit at my table, look me in the eye, and tell me the truth. Help is not forging papers to make me look like I've lost my mind." She pressed her hands against her face, muffling a sob. "Daniel doesn't know everything," she confessed. "He just knows about the debts. He thinks Richard changed his will because he was worried about you. He doesn't know about the fake records. He doesn't know I lied." My knees weakened, and I sat back down, pressing my hand to my chest as though I could hold my heart together. My son. My Daniel. The boy I had carried, nursed, and raised. The man I still saw sometimes as that little boy running across our yard with scraped knees. He believed her. He thought his own mother couldn't be trusted. I whispered almost to myself. She turned my son against me. Frank leaned closer, his voice gentle but firm. She poisoned his view of you. But now you know the truth. And soon so will he. The room seemed to fade around me. The suits, the expensive art, the polished table, they no longer mattered. All I could see was Vanessa's face, twisted in desperation. All I could hear was Frank's steady voice telling me Richard's will was untouched, that my husband's trust in me had never wavered. A knock rattled the door again. This time, it was sharper, more official. A woman's voice called from outside. "Detective Brooks, Police Department. We received a report of fraud and forgery in progress." Morrison's face drained of blood. He barked at the secretary. "Who called them?" Frank raised his chin, his eyes unflinching. "I did. Before I walked in here." The door opened, and a woman in her 50s entered, wearing a dark suit, her badge clipped at her belt. Her gaze swept the room quickly, her presence commanding without a word. "I'm Detective Laura Brooks," she said. "I understand there are serious allegations here. I'll need to see all documents immediately." For the first time since entering that office, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel all day: safety. The weight on my chest loosened, just enough for me to breathe. Vanessa collapsed back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. Morrison stuttered, his voice unsteady. "Detective, this is all a misunderstanding." But Detective Brooks didn't even glance at him. Her sharp eyes found mine. "Mrs. Carter, I want you to tell me everything from the beginning." And in that moment, as my tears finally spilled freely, I realized that Richard's voice, his love, his trust, was being defended not just by me, but by strangers willing to fight for the truth. Detective Brooks moved deeper into the room, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. She didn't rush, didn't raise her voice, but the way her presence filled the space made even the most arrogant attorney shrink back. She laid a folder on the table, pulled out a pen, and looked at me with steady eyes. "Mrs. Carter, please start from the beginning. Tell me what led you here today." I hesitated, my hands trembling slightly as I clasped them in my lap. For a moment, I wasn't sure I could speak. My throat burned, my chest tight, and then I felt Richard's name. His signature on the document Frank had laid before me, like a hand pressed firmly against my back, urging me forward. I swallowed hard. I came for a simple meeting about my husband's inheritance. They told me he had changed his will, that he doubted me, that I wasn't capable of managing my own life anymore. My voice cracked on those words. My eyes flickered toward Vanessa. She wouldn't look at me. She stared down at the table as if the wood grain could save her. Detective Brooks nodded calmly, jotting notes as I spoke. "And then I was stopped in the parking garage by Mr. Doyle," I said, gesturing toward Frank. "He told me things were not what they seemed, that my daughter-in-law had been working with this firm to change documents. I didn't know if I should believe him, until I walked in here." Frank quietly slid the original will closer to the detective. She studied it carefully, flipping through each page with precise movements. She glanced at Morrison, whose face was now drenched in sweat. "Mr. Morrison, would you like to explain why your client was presented with altered documents while her husband's actual will was hidden away?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Detective, you don't understand. These allegations are outrageous. We were only following." "Following what?" she interrupted sharply. "Instructions from your client? Or instructions from your greed?" Her tone was controlled but cut like glass. Vanessa suddenly lifted her head, her face streaked with tears. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaking. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. Daniel doesn't know what I've done. He thinks it was all real. He thinks Richard wanted to protect his mother." The word stabbed through me. My chest ached with a pain I couldn't mask. My son. My Daniel. How many nights had I sat by his crib, rocking him to sleep, whispering promises that I would always protect him? And here I was, betrayed not just by his wife, but by the lies she had planted in his heart. Detective Brooks leaned forward, her expression softening just slightly as she looked at me. "Mrs. Carter, did your husband ever give you reason to think he doubted your ability to manage your affairs?" I shook my head fiercely, my tears spilling. "Never. Richard trusted me. He depended on me. I handled the bills, the investments, everything. He never once made me feel incapable. If anything, he reminded me often that I was the stronger one." My voice broke then, and I pressed my hand against my mouth to muffle a sob. The detective's eyes softened. "Thank you. That's important." Frank spoke up then, his voice steady but weighted with emotion. "Detective, I worked at this firm for 12 years. I know their patterns. This isn't the first time they've twisted estates to cut out family members they deem inconvenient. But this one cut deeper. Richard Carter was one of the only clients who treated me like I mattered. When I heard them plotting against his widow, I couldn't stay silent." Vanessa let out a low moan, collapsing into herself. Her shoulders shook as she whispered, "I just wanted to save us. We were drowning in debt. I didn't know what else to do." Her words made me flinch. Save us. And who was I in that equation? A roadblock? A burden to be swept aside? I leaned forward, my voice trembling but laced with fury. "Do you even hear yourself? You sat in my house. You ate at my table. You watched me grieve, and while I clung to memories of Richard, you were planning to erase me. You weren't saving anyone. You were destroying me." Vanessa covered her face, sobbing harder now. For the first time, I saw cracks in her confidence. Not the polished daughter-in-law, but a woman cornered by her own lies. Detective Brooks finally closed the folder and stood tall. "Here's what's going to happen," she said firmly. "We'll be seizing these documents as evidence. Mr. Morrison and his associates will be taken into custody for questioning. And Vanessa," she turned her sharp gaze toward her, "you'll be coming with us too. Forgery, fraud, conspiracy. These are not small charges." Vanessa's head snapped up, her face pale and panicked. Please no. Evelyn, please don't let them. I rose slowly from my chair, every muscle trembling but my spine straight as iron. My tears had dried into something stronger now. You had your chance to come to me. You had your chance to tell the truth. You chose lies. You chose betrayal. I can't save you from the consequences you created. Her mouth opened as if to argue, but no words came. She slumped back, defeated, her sobs echoing in the heavy silence. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt something shift inside me. Not joy, not relief, but the smallest flicker of justice. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone in this fight as I thought. Detective Brooks gave a quick signal with her hand, and within moments 2 uniformed officers stepped into the conference room. The sight of them made the lawyers shift uneasily in their seats. Morrison, who had looked untouchable minutes earlier, now seemed small, his lips pressed into a thin line, his forehead slick with sweat. The officers began gathering the piles of papers that Frank had laid out. Each page was slipped into a large evidence bag, the crackle of plastic loud in the tense silence. Watching those documents vanish into the custody of the police felt like watching pieces of Richard's honor being carefully protected. I whispered under my breath, "Thank you, Richard," though I wasn't sure anyone else heard. Vanessa looked like a doll left out in the rain. Her hair clung to her cheeks, her mascara was smudged, and her body sagged against the chair. She turned her face toward me suddenly, her eyes swollen and red. "Evelyn, I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe that. I was desperate. Daniel doesn't know what I've done. He loves you. He thinks Richard was only worried about you." The mention of my son's name pierced me like a knife. My chest tightened, and I pressed my palm against the table, needing the stability. "Daniel loves you." The words echoed in my head, but they sounded hollow. How could love exist in a heart that had doubted his own mother's mind? Detective Brooks walked slowly toward Vanessa, her notebook in hand. "You're saying your husband had no knowledge of these forged documents? That you acted alone?" Vanessa nodded rapidly, tears dripping onto the table. "He only knew about the debts. He thought Richard really changed the will because he was worried about Evelyn. I told him stories, small things so it would make sense to him. He never saw the papers. He didn't know I was lying." Hearing her admit it out loud was like watching a dam break. My hands trembled violently. I wanted to scream, to cry, to demand why she thought my life was hers to twist, but the sound that came out was quieter. "Broken. You poisoned my son against me." Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. Frank leaned closer to me and spoke in a low voice meant only for my ears. "She can't undo what she's done, but you don't have to let her keep winning. The truth is on your side now. Hold on to that." I nodded faintly, though my throat burned too much to speak. Detective Brooks began asking direct questions, her tone steady and sharp. "Vanessa, when did you first approach Morrison and Associates?" "About 6 months ago," Vanessa admitted, her voice shaking. "At first it was just questions about estate planning. Then we started talking about changing things." "Did Mr. Morrison or anyone on his staff explain that forging legal documents is a felony?" Vanessa's shoulders collapsed. "They said it happens all the time. They said no one would question it if Evelyn showed signs of memory loss." The detective's pen scratched against her notebook. She turned to Morrison next. "And you, sir? Did you encourage this scheme?" Morrison straightened his tie, his jaw tightening. "Detective, I resent the implication. We acted on information provided by our client. If that information was false, we are victims as much as Mrs. Carter." Frank let out a bitter laugh that startled the room. "Victims? You charged her $50,000 to fabricate lies. I've got the invoices. Don't you dare call yourself a victim." Detective Brooks didn't smile, but her eyes flicked to Frank with a hint of respect. "We'll verify everything. For now, everyone involved will be taken to the station for questioning." The officers stepped forward. Vanessa let out a sharp sob, clutching the edge of the table. "Please, Evelyn, don't let them take me. I can explain. I can make this right." I stood slowly, my legs weak but my back straight. My voice shook, but it carried across the room. "You had every chance to make it right before this. You looked me in the eye, you called me Mom, and you still chose betrayal. This," I gestured at the officers waiting beside her, is the only thing left now. She collapsed into tears, her body curling in on itself. I watched her, and for the first time in years, I felt nothing but emptiness where once there had been love, even admiration. Detective Brooks turned to me gently. Mrs. Carter, would you be willing to come to the station to give a full statement? It will help us move this case forward. I hesitated, my gaze falling on the manila folder that now lay sealed in the evidence bag. Richard's signature, his will, his love, all proof that he never doubted me. I lifted my chin. Yes, I'll come. I want to make sure Richard's wishes are honored. As the room emptied, I caught one last glimpse of Vanessa being led away in handcuffs. Her sobs echoed down the hallway, but they didn't move me. That woman was no longer family. She was a stranger wearing the mask of my daughter-in-law. Frank lingered beside me as we walked out. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. You're stronger than you realize, Mrs. Carter. Don't let her lies make you forget that. I swallowed hard, my eyes brimming. I almost did. But not anymore. As we stepped into the cool evening air, I realized something. This wasn't just about inheritance or money. This was about Richard's trust in me, about my dignity, about my right to live without being erased by lies. And I would fight for that, no matter how long it took. The ride to the police station felt endless. The city lights blurred past the window, yet all I could see was Richard's face in my mind. His gentle smile, the way his hand always found mine in a crowd. I wondered what he would think if he knew the people he trusted had turned against me, if he knew that our son had been convinced to believe lies about my mind. My chest ached with the weight of it. Detective Brooks sat beside me in the back of the patrol car. She didn't push me to talk. She just sat quietly, her notepad resting on her lap, her sharp eyes softening whenever they glanced in my direction. At one point, she said, "You don't have to be afraid. The truth is stronger than lies. It always is. Even if it takes time." Her words should have comforted me, but all I felt was a hollow ache. The truth may have been on my side now, but it had already poisoned something sacred. My relationship with Daniel. When we arrived, the officers led Morrison and his associates through one entrance, Vanessa through another. I caught a glimpse of her as she was escorted down the hallway. Her hair was messy, her eyes swollen, her steps shaky. She looked nothing like the polished woman who had once walked into my kitchen with store-bought pies and a perfect smile. She looked like what she was, a liar who had run out of places to hide. I sat in a small room with pale walls and a single table. The air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Detective Brooks settled across from me, her notepad open. "Mrs. Carter, I know this is painful, but I need you to walk me through your relationship with your daughter-in-law. Everything you can remember, from the beginning." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. My eyes drifted to the wall, where a faint crack ran from the ceiling down to the corner. I thought about 8 years ago, when Daniel had first brought Vanessa home. She was 25 then, young and eager, with bright eyes and a laugh that seemed genuine. Richard and I had welcomed her with open arms. She had been polite, thoughtful, always agreeing with what we said. At the time, I thought she was simply trying to fit in. Now I realized she had been studying us, learning exactly what we wanted to hear. "She was perfect," I said finally, my voice quiet but steady. "Too perfect." She always knew what to say. I thought it was kindness, but now I see it was calculation. Detective Brooks nodded, her pen moving across the page. "And when did you first notice something was wrong?" I let out a long breath, my fingers twisting together on the table. "About 3 years ago." She started making little comments. Nothing big. Just suggestions that maybe I was forgetting things. She'd ask if I remembered conversations that never happened. She'd mention events I knew hadn't taken place. At the time, I brushed it off. I thought maybe I really was forgetting small things. But now I see she was planting seeds, making me doubt myself. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears. She was patient. She chipped away at me piece by piece until even my own son thought maybe something was wrong with me. My voice cracked on the word son. Detective Brooks set her pen down gently. "Tell me about Daniel." My heart clenched. "He's 33. He's my only child. Richard and I raised him with love. He was always smart, always kind. But he believed her. He believed that Richard thought I wasn't capable anymore. He believed the lies she told about me. My hands trembled as I pressed them against the table. Do you know what it feels like to have your own child doubt you? To have the boy you rocked to sleep, the man you thought you could lean on, look at you and wonder if you're losing your mind? It's worse than losing money. Worse than losing an estate. It's like losing yourself. Tears slid down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. Detective Brooks leaned in slightly, her voice calm. Mrs. Carter, you haven't lost him. Not yet. Lies can cloud judgment, but the truth has a way of breaking through. When he sees the evidence, when he hears what really happened, he'll know who to trust. Her words touched something fragile inside me, but I couldn't let myself hope too much. I had seen the way Vanessa twisted reality, how easily Daniel had accepted her stories. Could he ever look at me again without that shadow of doubt in his eyes? As if reading my thoughts, the door opened and an officer leaned inside. Detective, Carter's son is here. He says he needs to see his mother. My breath caught. My hands froze in my lap. The room tilted for a moment, my heart racing so fast it hurt. Daniel. My boy. Was he here to comfort me? Or to defend her? Detective Brooks touched my hand briefly, grounding me. You don't have to talk to him if you're not ready. I shook my head slowly. No. I need to hear what he has to say. The officer nodded and disappeared. A moment later, Daniel stepped into the room. He looked nothing like the polished man I remembered. His hair was messy, his face pale, his eyes ringed with dark circles. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. When his eyes found mine, I saw guilt, fear and something else. Something that looked almost like shame. Mom, he whispered, his voice breaking on the single word. My heart twisted painfully. For a moment, I wanted to run to him, to pull him into my arms like when he was little. But then I remembered Vanessa's lies, the documents, the way he had believed her. So I stayed seated, my body rigid. Daniel, I said softly, my voice trembling. Tell me you weren't part of this. Daniel didn't move closer at first. He stood by the doorway like a guilty child caught sneaking into a room where he didn't belong. His hands opened and closed at his sides, restless, like he wanted to reach for me but didn't know if he had the right. I sat frozen, my palms pressed against the cold metal of the table, grounding myself. My voice trembled as I repeated, Tell me you weren't part of this, Daniel. Tell me you didn't try to erase me. His face twisted, his jaw tightening as though the words hurt him physically. I didn't know, he said quickly, his voice raw. Mom, I swear to you, I didn't know about the forged papers. I thought. His eyes filled with tears. I thought Dad had really changed the will. Vanessa told me. She told me you were slipping, that you were forgetting things, accusing people of stealing. I believed her. God help me, I believed her. The sound of his voice, my son's voice, cracked something inside me. I wanted to believe him, to hold on to the hope that he had been nothing but a pawn in Vanessa's lies. But the wound was too deep to heal in a moment. You looked at me, I whispered, tears spilling down my cheeks. You looked at me in my own home and thought I was losing my mind. Do you know what that felt like? To see doubt in your eyes? To feel like the one person I thought I could lean on had already decided I wasn't enough. Daniel's face crumpled. He stepped closer now, slowly, like he was afraid I might push him away. I'm sorry, Mom. I can't take that back. I should have asked you. I should have trusted you. But she made it sound so convincing. And I was scared. Scared of losing everything Dad built. Scared of you not being okay. His voice cracked. And maybe I was scared of losing her too. I let out a sharp, broken laugh. Scared of losing her? Daniel, she tried to destroy me. She tried to paint me as insane. And you were worried about losing her? His shoulders sagged under the weight of my words. He looked at the floor, shame written across every line of his body. I was wrong, he whispered. I see that now. When the police came to the house and told me what they'd found, when they said she admitted it, I felt sick. I should have seen it sooner. I should have protected you. For a long time, I just stared at him. The boy I had raised, the man I had trusted, standing before me with his head bowed like a sinner at confession. My heart ached with a love that hadn't died, no matter how badly it had been wounded. But it was tangled with anger, with disappointment so heavy I thought it might crush me. Finally I whispered, You broke my heart, Daniel. He closed his eyes, his tears falling freely now. I know. And I don't deserve your forgiveness. But please, don't turn away from me completely. I can't lose you, Mom. Not you. Detective Brooks had been silent in the corner, watching, giving us space. But now she spoke gently. Mrs. Carter, I know this is hard. But your son's testimony will matter in this case. If he cooperates, it will strengthen everything. The truth has to be spoken, not just for the court, but for healing. I nodded slowly, though my chest felt like it was caving in. Healing. What a strange word. Could there ever be healing after this? Daniel moved closer still, finally sinking into the chair across from me. He reached across the table hesitantly, his hand trembling. Please, Mom. I need you to believe me. I didn't plan this. I didn't want this. I was blind, but I wasn't your enemy. I swear it. My hand hovered above his, torn between pulling away and holding on. The years of rocking him to sleep, of bandaging scraped knees, of cheering at his graduations, all of it flooded me at once. I wanted to cling to that boy, not the man who had doubted me. Finally, with a shaking breath, I placed my hand on top of his. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a thread, a small, fragile thread of connection that hadn't snapped entirely. His shoulders shook with relief as he covered my hand with both of his. Thank you, he whispered. I'll make this right. I'll tell them everything. I swallowed hard, my tears still flowing. You can't erase what happened, Daniel. But if you truly want to make it right, you'll stand beside me when the truth comes out. You'll stand where you should have stood from the start. He nodded fiercely, his eyes burning with resolve. I will. I promise. Detective Brooks rose, her expression soft but resolute. Then we'll begin formal statements. Vanessa's confession already puts her at the center, but your testimony, Mr. Carter, will close the gap. This firm won't walk away from this. Not this time. As she gathered her notes, I leaned back in my chair, exhausted. My hand still rested in Daniel's, though the weight of betrayal lingered heavy in my heart. I didn't know if our bond would ever fully heal. But at least, for the first time in months, I felt a small glimmer of hope. Like maybe Richard's love had left us strong enough to fight through even this storm. The days that followed felt unreal, like I was living inside a story someone else had written. One moment, I had walked into a law office expecting to sign papers and quietly move forward with my grief. The next, I was standing in the middle of a storm of fraud, betrayal, and police reports. At the station, I gave my statement in full detail. My voice shook more than once, but Detective Brooks never rushed me. She listened, asked clear questions, and wrote carefully, like every word mattered. Daniel sat outside during most of it, waiting his turn. Each time I glanced through the small glass window, I saw him sitting with his head bowed, his hands clenched together, as if praying for a chance to undo the damage. When it was finally his turn, I watched from the hallway. His voice cracked more than once as he explained how Vanessa had convinced him. He admitted he had doubted me, admitted the shame of believing lies over his own mother. The detective's expression stayed neutral, but I saw her writing quickly, catching every detail. That night, I went home to an empty house. For years, Richard had filled these rooms with his quiet humming. His books stacked on every table. His warm presence in every corner. Now, the silence pressed down on me harder than ever. I sat on the couch, clutching one of his old sweaters, inhaling the faint scent that still lingered. I whispered into the stillness, I hope I did right, Richard. I hope you're proud of me. The following week moved quickly. Lawyers called, officers visited, and the case began to form into something larger than I had imagined. Morrison and his firm were charged with multiple counts of fraud and forgery. Vanessa faced charges of conspiracy and tampering with legal documents. She had been denied bail once already, the judge calling her a risk of continued deception. Still, the hardest part wasn't the legal battle. It was Daniel. He came to see me almost every day. Sometimes he brought groceries, sometimes just sat in silence across from me, his face heavy with guilt. One evening, as I made tea, he spoke softly from the kitchen table. Mom, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. But I need you to know, I believe you now. Completely. I see how wrong I was. I set the teapot down with trembling hands. It's not just about believing me, Daniel. It's about the fact that you didn't believe me when it mattered most. That's a wound that won't heal overnight. He lowered his gaze, his voice barely above a whisper. I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving I deserve your trust back. There was sincerity in his voice, but pain too. I wanted to reach for him, to bridge the gap, but the hurt still clung too tightly. When the court date was announced, my stomach twisted with dread. I had never liked courtrooms, never liked the coldness of legal proceedings. But this wasn't just about money or papers. This was about Richard's name, about my dignity, about proving I wasn't the frail, confused woman Vanessa had painted me to be. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully. A simple navy dress, pearls Richard had given me on our 20th anniversary, and the soft scarf he used to insist made me look elegant. As I looked in the mirror, I whispered, "You'll be with me today, won't you?" When I arrived at the courthouse, Frank was already waiting outside. He looked sharper than before, though still carrying that air of humility that made him stand out from the polished lawyers rushing around us. He smiled faintly. "Mrs. Carter, you're stronger than half the people in there. Don't forget that." I managed a small smile. "I wouldn't even be here without you." Inside, the courtroom buzzed with quiet chatter. The attorneys from Morrison's firm sat stiffly at one table, their faces pale. Vanessa sat behind them, flanked by guards. She looked thinner, her eyes hollow, her once perfect posture now hunched. For a brief moment, my heart almost softened, until I remembered every lie she had told, every seed of doubt she had planted. Daniel sat beside me, his hand resting nervously on his knee. He glanced at me now and then, as if searching for signs that I still wanted him there. I didn't hold his hand, but I didn't push him away either. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. The proceedings began, documents were presented, and witnesses called. Frank testified first, his voice calm but firm, recounting the invoices, the altered files, and the conversations he had overheard. His words painted a clear picture, one the defense struggled to counter. Then it was my turn. As I walked to the witness stand, my knees wobbled, but I lifted my chin. I swore the oath, my voice steady, and began to speak. I am Evelyn Carter. I was married to Richard Carter for 40 years. We built a life together, raised our son, and trusted the people around us. My husband never doubted me. He never once suggested that I couldn't handle our affairs. The lies told about me, they weren't just attacks on my ability. They were attacks on my dignity, my identity, my very place in the family we created. My voice trembled, but I forced myself to continue, locking eyes with the judge. I am not senile. I am not confused. I am a widow who deserves the truth of her husband's wishes to be honored. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. For the first time in months, I felt Richard's strength inside me. When I stepped down, Daniel reached for my hand. This time I let him hold it. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as the final witnesses finished. Documents had been presented, confessions played, and lies unraveled. Vanessa sat slumped in her chair, her once polished image now stripped bare. The attorneys who had backed her shifted nervously, knowing their futures were crumbling along with hers. When the judge spoke, his voice was firm, echoing through the silent room. The evidence before this court is overwhelming. Forged documents, falsified medical reports, and attempts to manipulate this widow's reputation are not only unlawful but deeply cruel. This court upholds the validity of Richard Carter's original will. Mrs. Carter, your rights stand. Justice will be served. The gavel struck, sharp and final. My knees weakened, but instead of collapsing, I stood taller. The weight I had carried for months seemed to lift, replaced by something steady and strong. My husband's honor was intact. My dignity was intact. They hadn't succeeded in erasing me. Vanessa cried out, her voice breaking. Please, Evelyn, I didn't mean to destroy you. But the guards took her by the arms, leading her away. Her pleas echoed behind her, but I didn't look back. Some wounds are too deep for sympathy. Daniel squeezed my hand tightly. His eyes brimmed with tears. Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have trusted you from the start. I looked at him, my heart torn between love and pain. Trust is like glass, Daniel. Once it breaks, it takes time to mend. But you're my son. And as long as you're willing to fight for what's right, there's still a chance. He nodded, his tears falling freely. I'll fight, Mom. I'll spend the rest of my life proving it. Outside the courthouse, Frank waited. He wasn't smiling with triumph, but with quiet relief. Richard would be proud of you, he said softly. My eyes filled again, but this time with something lighter than grief. He always believed in me. I almost forgot how to believe in myself. Thank you, Frank, for reminding me. The sun broke through the clouds then, warm against my face. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe. That night, I sat in Richard's old armchair, the house quiet but no longer suffocating. I opened the small box where I kept his letters. Dozens of them, written over years of marriage. I read one line again and again. I trust you, Evelyn. Always. I pressed the paper to my chest and whispered. They tried to take everything, Richard. But they couldn't take that. They couldn't take what we built. As I sat there, I thought of the lesson carved painfully into my heart. Trust is fragile, but truth is stronger. Lies can shake foundations, but they cannot destroy the core of who we are, unless we let them. Vanessa's greed had cost her everything. My son's blindness had nearly cost me more than money. It had almost cost me my dignity. But in the end, truth had prevailed. And I knew Richard's voice, his faith, his love, would never be silenced. I closed my eyes, letting the peace settle over me. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, I rested knowing I had survived. And as I drifted into sleep, I carried with me the lesson I would never forget. The value of honesty, the weight of trust, and the power of standing tall even when the world tries to make you small.